Welcome to Dreamtime Discoveries. Tonight we drift into the shadows between dreams and reality, where abduction memories, sleep paralysis, and unspoken truths await. Close your eyes and fall asleep to the truth. The terror of abduction dreams. When sleep becomes a portal. Across the world, people go to sleep and experience something terrifying. Not a nightmare, not a hallucination. They describe it as real. And it always begins the same way. A sudden awareness while the body is frozen. A hum, a presence, a loss of control. Then come the lights, the figures, the paralysis, and always the feeling that something intelligent is watching them. These are what many now call abduction dreams, vivid and often traumatic experiences that feel like actual alien encounters. They don't behave like typical dreams. They follow a structure. They involve recurring symbols, sensations, and sequences. And most disturbingly, they seem to connect people who have never met across different countries and cultures, describing nearly identical experiences. Reports include levitating from the bed, floating through walls or ceilings, and being placed on metallic tables for strange procedures. The beings encountered are usually described the same way. Tall, thin, hairless, with oversized black eyes and elongated limbs. Some are insect-like. Others are gray, humanoid, and eerily still. Whether the dream takes place in a field, a room, or inside a craft, the patterns hold steady. In the United States alone, surveys suggest millions have had dreams or experiences they associate with alien contact. And yet, these dreams are not abstract or surreal. They're specific, coherent, and often life-altering. Many experiencers report waking up confused, panicked, or deeply shaken. Others find strange marks on their bodies. Some develop a fear of going to sleep altogether. One of the most publicized accounts came from Whitley Strieber, who in 1987 published Communion, detailing his terrifying experiences while sleeping in his cabin in New York. In the book, he describes waking to find figures in his room, followed by missing time and fragmented memories of being inside a blindingly bright room. Though many dismissed his story as fantasy, thousands of readers reached out to say they had experienced something eerily similar, often beginning as what they believed to be just a dream. Another chilling case is that of Travis Walton. Though his story is often framed as a physical abduction, Walton initially remembered it only as a dreamlike sequence. Lights, beings, paralysis. Later, under hypnosis, more details emerged. Sensations of floating, telepathic messages, the overwhelming presence of non-human intelligence. Huel known to experience this. Thousands of ordinary people have shared their stories quietly. A nurse in Canada reported recurring dreams of being shown alien star maps. A man in rural Chile described being paralyzed in his sleep while tall figures with glowing hands surrounded his bed. In Thailand, a young woman spoke of nightly dreams where she was taken from her home and floated above fields, shown flashing images she couldn't decode. Disturbing isn't just the content, it's the consistency. These people had never met, lived thousands of miles apart, and spoke different languages. And yet they described the same cold rooms, the same black-eyed beings, and the same overwhelming feeling of being watched. The dreams felt orchestrated, external, as though someone or something had placed them there. This raises a crucial question. Are these abduction dreams actually dreams, or are they fragmented memories of something more? A kind of contact event occurring in the subconscious realm? The human brain is most vulnerable during sleep. In REM, perception blurs and time distorts. If a non-human intelligence wanted to interact with us without alerting the public, without triggering panic or leaving trace evidence, it wouldn't need to appear in the physical world. It could simply enter our minds while we sleep. The dream state is private, unrecordable, and deniable. That makes it the perfect medium for interaction or manipulation. Some researchers believe that these dreams might not just be contact, but part of a program. A deliberate sequence of exposures meant to condition, test, or even prepare select individuals. It begins subtly. A single vivid dream, then another stronger. Over time, the dreamer begins to expect them, even sense when they're coming. They report anxiety before sleep, pressure on the chest, a rising hum eventually. Some say the fear fades, replaced by curiosity, or even familiarity. What's even more strange is the way these dreams evolve. New elements are introduced. Some experiencers report seeing strange symbols, hearing electronic tones, or being shown visions of disasters, alien landscapes, or human suffering. Others are told that they have a mission or that they are being prepared for something. These aren't chaotic nightmares. They feel organized. Skeptics point to media influence, science fiction, movies, and folklore. But many of these dreams predate exposure to alien-themed entertainment. Betty and Barney Hill, who reported one of the first well-known abduction cases in the 1960s, described gray-skinned beings with large heads and black eyes before those traits became widely known. Similarly, Travis Walton's story came years before the alien prototype was cemented in pop culture. Even more compelling is that many people begin having these dreams without any belief in aliens. Some even ridicule the topic until the dreams start. That's what makes the experience so disorienting. It defies belief systems. It breaks through logic. It creates an emotional impact that can't be shaken off. And while some write it off as sleep paralysis or night terrors, others begin to notice that these experiences don't fit those models. Sleep paralysis often involves shadowy figures or a feeling of pressure. But abduction dreams go far beyond. They unfold in complex scenes. They include dialogue, emotional manipulation, environments that repeat. The experiencer often wakes remembering everything, not in fragments, but in vivid, disturbing clarity. There's also the physical evidence. Though rare, some people awaken with symmetrical bruises, scoop marks, or nosebleeds. Others claim to find unknown substances. Another pattern emerges when families are studied. Entire households have reported abduction dreams, sometimes simultaneously. In some cases, multiple family members recall different parts of what seems to be the same experience, as if each was given a piece of the puzzle. This suggests not just random intrusion, but a deliberate targeting strategy, possibly generational tracking, genetic study, or memory programming. Even more intriguing are accounts where individuals have seen people they know during abduction dreams. A friend on another table, a sibling in the same room, both experiencing the same beings. Though anecdotal, these cases suggest shared dream environments or coordinated events. Researchers and psychologists are divided. Some insist it's a mental health issue, a combination of sleep disorders and cultural suggestion, but others acknowledge the complexity. Harvard psychiatrist Dr. John Mack famously studied dozens of abduction experiencers and concluded that these people were not delusional. But why would aliens choose dreams? Because dreams leave no evidence. Because dreams can be denied. Because dreams are intimate. A direct path to the human core. The experiencers don't forget. They carry the emotional imprint for years. Some go silent. Others speak out and are ridiculed. But they all say the same thing. It was too real to be a dream. And it wasn't mine. Perhaps we've been looking in the wrong place, searching the skies for ships, watching the news for disclosure. But the real contact, the real program, may be running silently every night behind closed eyes. Every time you dream, you may not be dreaming alone. Part 2, Hacking the Dream State, How They Might Use Sleep to Reach Us. The idea that aliens may be contacting humans through dreams is no longer just a fringe belief. It's a theory supported by an overwhelming number of consistent reports. These experiences are not chaotic, symbolic dreams. They are structured, repeating, and intensely real. What makes them especially disturbing is the possibility that non-human intelligences are deliberately hijacking the dream state to initiate covert contact with human beings. These aren't just chance interactions or misinterpreted nightmares. The growing body of experiencer accounts points to a coordinated system of access and manipulation using sleep as the operational window. REM sleep is ideal for this kind of contact. The brain is highly active, the body is paralyzed, and external stimuli are filtered through a hypersuggestible mental state. Most people lose their critical faculties during sleep. If a technologically or cognitively superior intelligence were looking for a discreet, secure, and undetectable way to interact with humans, infiltrating their dreams would be the perfect method. The question is not just how aliens are using dreams. It's why many experiencers report clear progression. The first dream is usually terrifying. They feel paralyzed, watched, examined. Beings appear, most often the archetypal Greys, thin, pale, with oversized black eyes and no emotion. The second or third dream introduces new elements, surgical instruments, flashing lights, unfamiliar symbols. As the dreams repeat, they become more structured. Some people report being taken to the same room again and again. The procedures evolve. Communication begins. This pattern suggests something beyond random access. It indicates a structured program. They eventually stopped near Conway, Pennsylvania, just outside Pittsburgh. At this point, after nearly 90 minutes of pursuit, the craft finally ascended at tremendous speed, disappearing into the upper atmosphere with a sudden burst of acceleration. It was gone, but the story was just beginning. The chase made national headlines. The Associated Press ran it coast to coast. Police chase flying saucer 85 miles. Reporters swarmed the Ravenna Sheriff's Department. TV crews wanted interviews. Spoor and Neff gave statements, as did several other officers who had witnessed the object along its path. The Air Force took notice. Within days, Project Blue Book, the official U.S. Air Force investigation into UFOs, sent representatives to interview the witnesses. Spoor and Neff were both subjected to lengthy questioning. According to Spoor, the investigators seemed more interested in discrediting them than uncovering the truth. The official Blue Book explanation, a satellite, or perhaps the planet Venus. The case was labeled solved and filed away. But that explanation didn't sit well with anyone who had been there. Venus doesn't hover above trees. It doesn't fly at low altitude for 85 miles across state lines, matching a police cruiser's speed. It doesn't ascend at supersonic velocity and vanish. And most critically, it doesn't cast bright beams of white light that illuminate an entire forest. Spoor pushed back publicly against the Blue Book summary, saying it was laughable and an insult, but the consequences were already mounting. His personal life unraveled. He became reclusive, struggled with paranoia, and later divorced. The ridicule and pressure drove him into silence. Neff too withdrew from public view. Other officers were instructed not to discuss the event further. Within months, the entire incident was buried beneath a wave of denial and forgotten press clippings. But decades later, investigators and authors revisited the case. Independent researchers were stunned by how closely the original incident had been documented. Radio logs, visual confirmations from multiple jurisdictions, and consistent witness statements all corroborated the same sequence of events. One journalist, James Mosley, interviewed Spoor years later and found him emotionally disturbed by the experience. "It ruined my life," Spoor told him. "All I did was see something I couldn't explain out in time." The Portage County chase became a staple in UFO literature, often cited as one of the best documented law enforcement encounters in the modern UFO era. continued to suggest that Spoor and Neff were mistaken, perhaps fooled by an atmospheric phenomenon or an aircraft with unusual lighting, but they never retracted their story. For years afterward, other officers in the region privately admitted to having seen strange lights in the skies over rural Ohio and Pennsylvania. Some even referenced the Portage County case with hushed reverence, as if it marked a line between routine police work and something unexplainable just beneath the surface. Interestingly, the case inspired more than just debate. It formed the loose inspiration for a scene in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where a police officer chases a UFO across the countryside. Spielberg would later cite the Portage County incident as one of the reports that influenced his portrayal of law enforcement in contact with the unknown. The original audio recordings of dispatch from that night, though never officially released in full, are known to exist. Several FOIA requests have yielded fragments of the Blue Book files, which still contain Spoor's original statements. Nowhere in those files is there evidence that the officers were hallucinating, lying, or otherwise unstable. Quite the opposite. They were described as calm, competent, and well-respected in their departments. To this day, the object remains unidentified. It was not a plane. It was not Venus. It was not a weather balloon, or a prank, or a secret military test. At least not one acknowledged by any agency. What it was is still unknown, but it changed lives. Dale Spoor passed away in 1983. He never recanted. His file, buried among thousands of pages of declassified UFO reports, is often overlooked. But for those who have read it, it stands as one of the most compelling pieces of UFO history on record. What do you do when the impossible flies just ahead of you, taunting your pursuit, visible to all, yet deniable by everyone in power? For Spoor, the answer was to follow it for as long as he could. And that chase, though long over, still echoes down the back roads of Ohio. Thank you for drifting with us through Dreamtime Discoveries. Another quiet journey into the unknown. If your mind is still wandering and sleep hasn't quite taken you yet, explore more videos. You're never alone in the dark. Sleep well. Until next time. Some researchers believe these experiences are part of a long-term data collection strategy. The beings are not simply watching. They are interacting with specific people repeatedly, logging their responses, probing emotional reactions, and in some cases extracting biological or psychological information. One woman, Carmen, from California, reported over 30 abduction dreams in 2 years. Each dream followed a nearly identical format. She was paralyzed in her bed. A bright light entered her room, and she was floated through the wall. Inside a dark chamber, 3 tall grays stood silently, while a 4th operated a control panel. She was examined and returned. Later dreams introduced a glowing orb that hovered near her head, which she said downloaded images into her mind. Star systems, mechanical blueprints, and symbols she didn't recognize. Carmen had no interest in aliens before these dreams began. She now keeps a dream log with hundreds of pages of recurring symbols and diagrams. Another pattern often overlooked appears that some individuals are being prepared for a purpose, possibly to serve as future communicators, test subjects, or even human liaisons. If that sounds dramatic, it's worth remembering that this is exactly how intelligence agencies operate when infiltrating a population by identifying individuals, testing boundaries, escalating contact, and assigning tasks. The difference is that, in this case, the infiltrators aren't human, and the battlefield isn't physical. It's neurological. Several experiencers describe dreams where the beings were not just present, but actively manipulating the dream environment in real time. In one documented case from France, a man named Vincent described seeing the walls of his dream environment change shape as he tried to resist. It was like they knew what I was thinking, and they adjusted the room to confuse me. He said, this suggests responsive control, indicating not just contact, but a two-way interface. Such reports support the theory that the dream state is being used as a training ground, a testing environment, or even a behavioral simulation. Rather than abducting physical bodies, a risky and inefficient method, these beings may be running simulations inside human minds to test reactions, implant memories, or trigger subconscious responses. There are also reports of interference patterns. Several experiencers claim that just before the dreams begin, they hear a high-pitched frequency or a mechanical humming. Some see flashes of light in their closed eyes. These features are consistent across continents and cultures, and they often precede lucid but involuntary contact experiences. This suggests that the intrusion is not purely symbolic. It has a real measurable energetic signature. It is theorized that the beings may use targeted frequency emissions to override the brain's natural dreaming process. REM sleep is dominated by theta waves, slow, emotionally rich. If aliens can modulate this frequency field remotely, they could theoretically suppress natural dream content and inject their own material into the sleeper consciousness. If this sounds imp, the beings vanish. The environment shifts. Some wake up violently with nosebleeds, disorientation, or full-body tremors. Others are met with resistance. The beings don't want them to wake up. This supports the idea that these dreams are monitored and perhaps even terminated when the subject becomes non-compliant. There are also numerous cases in multi-person dreams where two or more people, often family members, have near-identical dreams on the same night. In one well-known case from Arizona, a mother and her teenage son both reported dreaming of being in a white room with grays on the night of a reported local UFO sighting. Both recalled the same symbols on the walls and similar procedures. They did not speak about it until weeks later when a TV show triggered the memory. These dreams appear to be not only targeted, but synchronized. Why would aliens go through this trouble? One possibility is that it allows for long-term behavioral influence without direct contact. By using dreams, they bypass cultural, religious, and governmental barriers. They can interact with individuals across different societies without ever being seen or recorded. Dreams leave no evidence, no radar blips, no satellite trails, but the experiencers remember, and often they are changed. This method also allows them to test neurological compatibility. Some abductees report being told in dreams that not all minds are ready or your frequency has been adjusted. Others report being rejected from the process. They looked at me and said, "Not this one," wrote an experiencer in South Africa. This suggests a screening process, possibly related to genetics, consciousness type, or even psychological resilience. Some believe this dream-based interaction is only phase one of a larger plan, that the beings are mapping human cognition in preparation for open contact, but only once enough people have been preconditioned. Others think it's about control influence without detection. Either way, the conclusion is the same. Dreams are not being left alone. They are being accessed, used, controlled. When asked why they've never seen a UFO or a ship, many abductees say the same thing. They don't need to come. They're already here in my head. The implications are massive. It means that alien contact isn't just imminent. It may be ongoing. Every night, people go to bed unaware that their most private moments may be the front lines of a quiet, hidden program. One that doesn't need ships or spotlights, just access to the brain. And a species that still believes dreams are only dreams. Part 3. Sleep paralysis, the engineered weakness. Sleep paralysis is often explained as a harmless neurological glitch. The brain awakens, but the body remains frozen. But for thousands of people across the world, this condition is not just unsettling. It's a recurring battleground. Victims report terrifying visions. Humanoid figures at the bedside, shadowy shapes pressing on their chest, the overwhelming feeling of being watched, studied, and controlled. Some even experience missing time or physical marks afterward, symptoms that defy the boundaries of dreams and suggest something far more deliberate is occurring. More researchers are beginning to examine the possibility that sleep paralysis is not a biological accident, but a vulnerability that alien intelligences have identified, targeted, and possibly learned to exploit. It may not be just a gateway. It may be a doorway they engineered themselves. If so, then the most terrifying aspect isn't the paralysis. It's the idea that advanced intelligence knows exactly when we're most helpless and uses that window to slip past our awareness undetected. Asterisk. Most documented abduction cases begin with a familiar pattern. The subject wakes suddenly in the night. Their mind is alert, but their body is unresponsive. They are paralyzed. Breathing becomes difficult. A pressure builds in the chest. Sometimes a high-pitched frequency or mechanical humming is reported in the ears. Within moments, a presence is felt, not imagined, felt in the room at the side of the bed watching. Some victims describe a warping of sound, like the room becoming underwater. Others hear footsteps that never reach them, or voices speaking in a language they understand without knowing how. Then the visual element begins. Dark shapes near the bed, tall silhouettes in the doorway, a flash of light, a shift in perception. The dream ends, or the abduction begins. Sleep paralysis is often brushed off as a neurological hiccup, an evolutionary leftover that prevents us from acting out dreams. But that explanation collapses under the weight of one disturbing truth. The sleep paralysis state is where the vast majority of alien abduction dreams begin. This is not coincidence. It is tactical. It is repeated with such consistency across geography, age, and culture that to ignore the pattern is to ignore the data. From a strategic standpoint, sleep paralysis is the perfect condition for access. The subject is awake but vulnerable, aware but immobile, conscious but unable to defend. There's no need for forced sedation, no risk of injury, and most importantly, no witnesses. There are countless cases where the experience is so vivid, so sensory-rich, that the victims insisted was more than a dream, and yet they are left with no tangible proof beyond odd bruises, strange symbols in the skin, or feelings of psychic exhaustion lasting for days. Many experiencers report that their abductions, whether dream-based, astral, or physical, always begin at the exact moment of paralysis. The paralysis becomes a trigger. The entities arrive, contact begins, and then the memory either collapses or is wiped completely. In 2013, a man named Joel from North Carolina reported a recurring sleep paralysis event that occurred every 3 nights. He would awaken at exactly 2:44 a.m., unable to move. Within seconds, a tall being would appear in the corner of the room. The figure never moved, but stared. The air became thick. Joel's heart rate spiked, and he reported auditory distortions, as if his hearing detuned. On the 7th night, he saw a flash of blue light and lost consciousness. He awoke 4 hours later on the living room floor with blood on his upper lip and a triangular burn on his wrist. Joel had no history of seizures, sleepwalking, or hallucinations. What was most disturbing to him wasn't the event. It was the precision, the recurrence, the design. People suffering from sleep paralysis often describe patterns too structured to dismiss. Repetition of the exact same time of night. Entities appearing in the same physical position. The same sequence of events, sounds, emotions. These are not hallucinations. They are rehearsed operations. Reports consistently reference beings taking specific positions. 2 on each side of the bed, 1 near the feet, 1 at the head. Many recall scan-like sensations, waves of energy pulsing through the body, often coinciding with visual hallucinations of light or color. These procedures are not dreamlike. They are methodical. Often they end abruptly with the subject jolting awake, heart racing, drenched in sweat, disoriented for hours. The beings involved are nearly always described as greys, emotionless, silent, cooperative in groups. Some experiencers report taller, more humanoid entities standing behind them, seemingly overseeing the process. These figures often appear to control the environment. Rooms shift, walls bend, visuals loop. Communication becomes nonverbal, implanted into the mind with crisp clarity. One experiencer in Norway described a grid being imposed over her vision as if her mind was being scanned layer by layer like a digital file. Another in Taiwan reported that his entire body vibrated while an entity uploaded something behind his eyes. One theory is that sleep paralysis allows for a kind of neurological bypass, a way to override the brain's motor functions and create a semi-conscious access point for direct interaction. The paralysis may not be a glitch. It may be a mechanism induced deliberately to immobilize and isolate the subject while the encounter occurs. Some abductees even describe feeling pulled from their body before the paralysis hits, suggesting that out-of-body experiences may be part of the protocol. Military operations involving interrogation, surveillance, or data collection often begin with incapacitation. Restrain the subject, control the setting, minimize risk. The same tactics appear in abduction reports. Whether these are physical abductions or psychic interventions, the goal appears to be the same. Freeze the body, isolate the mind, access without resistance. In one Canadian case, Nadia, a college student, experienced chronic sleep paralysis. She described seeing 3 thin figures near her bed, always standing motionless until she made eye contact. On her 6th episode, she managed to stay calm and noticed a new detail. One of the beings held what she described as a floating orb that emitted a pulsing light. As soon as her gaze locked on the orb, the scene collapsed. She woke up in her bathroom with no memory of walking there. Her phone showed she had not received or sent messages during the lost time, a window of 3 hours. The implication is chilling. Not only are these episodes induced, they may include real physical displacement and still leave the experiencer doubting their own memory. In Argentina, a 9-year-old boy named Martin repeatedly described the quiet men who came at night. His parents ignored the stories until they found him standing barefoot outside the house at 3 a.m. with a nosebleed, whispering numbers he couldn't explain. Doctors found nothing medically wrong, but he never had sleep paralysis again and never spoke of the men again. Either. Sleep paralysis doesn't just allow contact. It allows memory suppression. Many abductees report not remembering anything at all until months or years later. Often a dream, a sound, or a film will trigger flashbacks. Some begin drawing symbols. Others find themselves obsessed with astronomy or quantum physics, subjects they never studied before. This suggests that memory dampening is part of the protocol. The subject is paralyzed. The procedure occurs. The memory is erased or buried beneath layers of false imagery. This is where screen memories come into play. False visuals inserted into the mind to mask the real event. A shadow figure becomes a childhood toy. A glowing orb becomes a ceiling light. The figures become animals. The goal is not just concealment, but compliance. If the subject believes it was just a dream, they are less likely to resist next time. The big question remains, why are they doing this? Theories vary. Some researchers believe the goal is neurological mapping, understanding human fear responses, emotional ranges, and memory retention. By inducing paralysis and observing reactions, they can collect data without exposure. Others believe these entities are conditioning select individuals for future use, whether for psychological communication, telepathic networking, or even hybridization programs. In many long-term abduction cases, sleep paralysis evolves into two-way interaction. The experiencer stops panicking and begins asking questions and sometimes gets answers. In 2008, Michael, a software engineer in the UK, began writing down his paralysis episodes. Over 3 years, he documented 47 events in the later entries. He describes cooperative dreams where the beings no longer restrained him. He was shown images of genetic sequences, planetary bodies, and holographic projections of Earth from orbit. He asked why me and was told not in words, but mentally you can receive. He now believes the paralysis was a test to see if his mind could adapt. This idea recurs across hundreds of cases. The paralysis is not an error. It is a filter. Those who survive it mentally, emotionally, are allowed deeper access. Perhaps we're being studied, or perhaps we're being recruited. Sleep paralysis linked to abduction is not a Western phenomenon. Reports span every continent, culture, and religion. In South America, the pisadera, a crone-like entity, is said to paralyze sleepers and ride their chest. In Japan, it's called koshi. Buried in Egypt, the jinn are said to pin people down in bed. These myths may be cultural overlays on the same phenomenon. Intelligent contact masked by regional interpretation. Interestingly, the description of the entity's thin, dark-eyed, humanoid remains consistent across these cultures. This supports the theory that the phenomenon is not imagined, but experienced, then interpreted through belief systems. When compared side by side, accounts from Brazil, Finland, South Korea, and Kenya show alarming similarities. Same sensations, same paralysis, same glowing orbs, same emotionless beings. These are not random events. They appear to be planned operations. The question often arises, do these beings use technology? In many cases, no physical devices are seen. The paralysis seems to be induced by proximity, by gaze, or even by thought. This implies the use of consciousness-based technology, tools that interface directly with human biology, using energy, intention, or frequency. Quantum science has already shown that consciousness affects particles. If these beings are thousands of years ahead, they may have developed tools that allow neurological shutdown without contact, simply by tuning to our brain operating frequencies. Some believe that electromagnetic pulses emitted at specific bandwidths can suppress motor function while keeping cognition intact. If humans are beginning to experiment with this, it's likely that non-human intelligences have already mastered it. Taken as a whole, the use of sleep paralysis by alien entities fits a classic command and control model. Identify target, often from childhood. Monitor responses over time. Induce paralysis to restrict mobility and isolate cognition. Apply procedure. Data extraction. Emotion testing. Message implantation. Suppress memory. Screen memories. Emotional fog. Repeat as needed. Escalating access based on compliance. This is not folklore. This is strategic behavior. And if it's happening nightly across the globe, silently, invisibly, then we are dealing with an intelligence that knows us better than we know ourselves. Sleep paralysis may feel like a harmless glitch in the sleep cycle, but for thousands, it is the entry point to something far stranger, something calculated, something patient. Asterisk, it may be that the paralysis itself, that terrifying moment of helplessness, is the first step in a larger process, a test of fear, a scan of consciousness, a signal to begin. The next time you wake in the dark, frozen, sensing that something is there, you might be right. Part 4. Altered Minds. Implanting fear, curiosity, or warnings. Not all abduction dreams are violent. Some are serene, others confusing. Some feel like training sessions, while others resemble guided hallucinations. But all share one unnerving trait: emotional intensity. Whether terror, awe, curiosity, or grief, abduction dreams don't fade, like ordinary dreams. They linger. They shape thoughts, behavior, and identity. And that, many researchers argue, is not accidental. It's the result of deliberate psychological manipulation by non-human intelligences. In this section, we examine the theory that aliens use the dream state not only to observe, but to implant ideas, emotional imprints, behavioral cues, perhaps even coded messages. These experiences may be subtle forms of contact, experiments in mental conditioning, or early steps in something larger. If abduction dreams feel engineered, it's because they are. And the human mind is the lab. Many experiencers report dreams that don't follow any normal subconscious pattern. They aren't fueled by daily stress or fleeting thoughts, but seem constructed with purpose. A woman in Arizona described recurring dreams of standing in an enormous white room, surrounded by entities she couldn't quite see, who would transmit intense emotional states, grief, guilt, and relief without words. She woke up crying each time, confused by the clarity and emotional weight of the experience. Another man in Sweden recounted dreams of alien beings walking him through hallways of floating orbs, each showing different apocalyptic futures. He said they weren't warnings, they were tests, as if the beings were gauging his emotional reactions. What ties these stories together is not just the surreal content, but the emotional payload. These aren't chaotic dreams. They feel scripted, calibrated. Many abductees describe being shown events, not necessarily real, but designed to provoke specific emotional responses. Some see loved ones dying, Earth destroyed, alien children in need of help, or cryptic symbols pulsing with meaning. They wake up with a feeling of urgency or dread that doesn't fade for hours, sometimes days. In Buenos Aires, a nurse named Isabel began having vivid abduction dreams shortly after her mother passed away. In them, a tall being with large black eyes would stand beside her and project images of her mother smiling, alive, and then abruptly vanishing. Isabel reported feeling not only grief, but also a strange sense of guilt, as though she were being tested for emotional stability. She had no prior history of sleep issues or psychological trauma. The dream stopped after 3 months, but she began painting alien landscapes compulsively, driven by a need to release the residue. As she put it, "What are these entities doing with our emotions? If these dreams are not mere projections of our subconscious, then they may serve as a type of emotional reconnaissance, by implanting, triggering, or amplifying feelings like terror, love, confusion, or even spiritual awe. They may be mapping the limits of our psyche, observing how much we can endure, how easily we break, or perhaps more disturbingly, how easily we comply." There's a repeated theme in many of these cases: the transition from fear to fascination. In early experiences, the dreamer is paralyzed with terror, but over time, that fear turns into curiosity. Some begin to seek out the dreams. They want answers. They want to feel it again. And the dreams oblige. That shift is what some researchers see as evidence of conditioning, not just experimentation, but long-term emotional sculpting. One lesser-known case occurred in Turkey in 2012, where a young artist named Emre described recurring dreams of being taken aboard a circular craft filled with translucent orbs. Each orb, he claimed, showed him scenes from human history, wars, births, unexplained phenomena, and then followed with glimpses of possible futures. The emotion each vision triggered in him was recorded by a being through an unseen device. Emery began painting the visions obsessively, later describing the dreams as a test of emotional resonance. He believed the beings were not just showing him things, but measuring his capacity to care. Abduction dreams may also serve another function: delivering warnings. But these warnings are rarely direct. They're symbolic, couched in surrealism. Floods, collapsing cities, dying forests. Not all experiencers interpret them as literal events. Many see them as metaphors. One recurring image is of Earth from above, surrounded by a thin barrier of light that flickers when the dreamer feels fear. Some believe this is a psychic metaphor for global instability, that these dreams are trying to push us toward awareness or spiritual evolution. Others believe they're simply manipulation, false flags, scenarios meant to keep us emotionally hooked. But to what end? Theories abound. Some argue this is all part of a slow contact initiative, a long-term acclimation campaign designed to prepare select individuals for eventual communication. Others believe it's about compliance. The more emotionally entangled the experiencer becomes, the more open they are to suggestion. And a few believe these dreams are part of a recruitment process where only those who demonstrate emotional pliability are chosen for further interaction. One man in Brazil, Luis, reported dreams where he was placed in simulated crisis, plane crashes, hostage situations, natural disasters. In each dream, he had to make decisions quickly, save others, and accept loss. After years of this, he began experiencing waking visions and developed what he called empathic bursts, where he could feel the emotions of others with disturbing clarity. Whether this was psychological or truly anomalous is unknown. But Luis believed he was being prepared for something, that he was being altered. What makes these stories so difficult to categorize is that they leave no physical trace, only mental residue. You can't measure an emotional implant. You can't X-ray a dream. But what you can see is behavior change. And that is exactly what researchers in the fringe community have begun tracking. Abductees who suddenly change careers, abandon families, adopt extreme beliefs, or develop new obsessions, all traceable to recurring dreams. These dreams become the pivot point. Many even describe a shift in perception after a particular dream. They begin to question reality, feel detached from daily life. Some experience ego death. Others report becoming hypersensitive to electromagnetic fields. Time Dior, are they the goal? The creation of minds that perceive beyond the norm? In Canada, a young woman named Ava described a dream in which she stood in a room of light surrounded by 6 beings. She was asked mentally if she was willing to open further. When she consented, she said her entire body vibrated and a language she didn't know filled her head. She spent the next year writing symbols in notebooks she couldn't understand. Only later did she find some of them matched obscure Sumerian glyphs. Ava wasn't a linguist. She was a dance instructor. But after the dreams, her life changed. She left her job and began researching ancient contact theories. She claimed she didn't choose this path. It was given to her. The psychological impacts of such dreams extend into belief systems as well. Many abductees who were once agnostic or non-religious begin to adopt spiritual frameworks that include aliens as guides, protectors, or even creators. Some begin referring to the beings as teachers, watchers, or elders. Whether this is coping, delusion, or contact is debated, but the shift is consistent. These are not just dreams. They become initiations. Some researchers speculate that these dreams are used to seed archetypes, primal images and themes that spread through. The more these images enter our collective imagination, the easier it becomes to manipulate belief through them. The theory suggests that the abduction dream is not just a personal event. It is mimetic, a virus of imagery, a tool of influence. And then there are those who reject all of this and still wake screaming, not because of what they saw, but because of what they now feel. That something got inside, that their thoughts are not entirely their own anymore, that what once was a nightmare is now a tether, a permanent line of influence. The question no longer seems to be whether the mind can be altered, but how it's being done, and to what end. In a conventional framework, dreams are personal, shaped by memory and emotion. But in the alien abduction paradigm, Dreams become tactical, repurposed into tools for long-term psychological transformation. Not with wires or implants, not even with words, but through the raw language of emotion, fear, longing, and belief. This emotional engineering, if real, would represent the most intimate form of contact ever attempted. Not through radio telescopes or spacecraft, but through the silent corridors of the human psyche. It bypasses science, religion, and authority. It enters at the level of dreams, where logic dissolves and identity is vulnerable. If this is a campaign of influence, it's a masterpiece of subtlety. There are no invasions, no threats, just a whisper at the edge of sleep, a vision in the dark, a feeling that doesn't go away. Perhaps that is their goal. Not to destroy us, but to mold us, to create resonance, to tune us like instruments. Every dream a frequency, every fear a lever, every curiosity a door. And if that's true, if the mind is the new frontier, then we may already be at war, not with weapons, but with influence, not over land, but over meaning. So the next time you dream of figures watching you, strange lights in the sky, or warnings you can't explain, ask yourself, who is speaking and who is listening? Because something may already be inside. Not to harm, not yet, but to shape. Part 5, The Whisper in the Dark. Are we being prepared for something greater? It's a recurring theme, not just among fringe theorists, but reported by otherwise rational, grounded individuals who describe a shift in the tone of their abduction dreams. Where once there were paralyzing fear and looming figures, now there are messages, visions, and an undeniable sense of direction. Not all abduction dreams end in panic anymore. Some end in wonder or even with instructions. These dreams don't just disturb, they imprint. What are they preparing us for? Abduction accounts going back decades have hinted at a subtle transformation. A change not just in how people perceive the dreams, but in how the aliens conduct their interventions. Experiencers begin to recognize patterns, sequences of symbols, mathematical codes, astronomical alignments. Some report being shown unfamiliar technology, devices that respond to thought, control gravity, or reveal images of Earth as seen from space. Others describe being led through simulated environments, Earth-like but altered, as if to test their reactions to changed ecosystems or societal shifts. A retired pilot in Brazil, who requested anonymity, recounted a series of dreams where he stood in a circular chamber surrounded by beings who transmitted visual sequences into his mind. Melting ice caps, cities overgrown by jungle, empty highways filled with dust. But the tone was not threatening. It was matter of fact, as if the beings weren't warning him, but acclimating him. When asked what he thought the purpose was, he replied simply, "They want us to be ready for when the sky changes." This is a different kind of alien intervention, not one based in trauma or extraction, but in grooming, psychological conditioning. These are not isolated experiences. They are consistent across continents, languages, and belief systems. The same imagery, the same voice that is not a voice, the same question planted in the subconscious. Are you ready? The idea that aliens might be preparing segments of humanity for something greater is not new, but the evidence is growing stronger. Some researchers argue this is part of a strategic multi-phase operation. First comes the observation, abductions filled with biological scans and behavioral analysis. Then induction, repetitive sleep paralysis events, enforced helplessness, neurological manipulation, and now education, albeit disguised as dreams. The mechanism remains elusive, but the goal is becoming clearer. It appears that select individuals are being conditioned to accept new knowledge, possibly even to integrate non-human logic systems or thought processes. This is not passive exposure. It's immersive mental restructuring. These dream intrusion scenarios are increasingly being reported not as symbolic or psychological, but as structured sessions engineered by a non-human intelligence. The Entiothers in online forums posted similar visuals, some with no background in geometry or math. Is it coincidence, or is it mass programming? There is a growing hypothesis among alien researchers that the purpose of abduction dreams is no longer just reconnaissance or behavioral study. Instead, it's part of a more sophisticated psychological campaign. These beings may be conditioning humans for a post-contact world. A civilization can be conquered with weapons, or it can be guided through perception. This would imply an astonishing level of foresight and control. A long game played with absolute precision. Imagine thousands, possibly millions of humans walking around with implanted ideas, programs running silently beneath the conscious mind, waiting for a catalyst. It shifts the narrative from visitation to infiltration. Elegant, silent, irreversible. And perhaps that's the real reason why governments stay silent. Not because they don't know, but because they can't control it. What power does any authority have over a species that doesn't need ships or weapons to access a population? A species that uses dreams, the most private and intimate part of human experience, as its interface. Former defense analysts have hinted at Dreamstate. Warfare as far back as the fall, 1970s. Project Stargate and later DIA, sponsored mind projection studies explored whether human consciousness could receive non-local transmissions. While many of those programs were buried or declassified with minimal results, there were hints that certain test subjects began reporting identical dream content, complex symbols, alien alphabets, planetary alignments. These patterns were so consistent that some researchers concluded the data was either being planted or received. This possibility reframes alien involvement not as hostile but as dominant. They don't need to break in. We already left the door open, and dreams are their key. There's also a mounting body of anecdotal evidence that abduction dream experiencers begin to undergo life changes that point to purposeful influence. Some abandon former careers and pivot toward environmental science, quantum physics, or social reform. Others become obsessed with preparation, not in a paranoid apocalyptic sense, but in a calm, resolute one. They begin to teach others, to form groups, to compare notes. The alien dream doesn't fade. It transforms the host dot. This suggests the whisper in the dark is not just a probe. It's a prompt, a call to action embedded not in words, but in images, impulses, and new perspectives that emerge without warning. A young woman named Ava from Queensland began having recurring dreams of standing on a glass platform suspended above the earth. Each time a different set of alien figures, sometimes grays, sometimes luminous humanoids, would show her scenes of human suffering, deforestation, war, oceans rising. At first, she believed it was just a climate anxiety-induced nightmare. But over time, the dreams changed. The beings showed her how small decisions ripple outward. They gave her feelings of calm, focus, and urgency. Ava went on to become a climate researcher, something she never previously considered. How many others are being nudged this way? If the goal is a psychological preparation for mass contact or even a civilizational shift, then the methods make sense. Operate through dreams. Use no violence. Avoid exposure. Trigger curiosity. Reward compliance. Implant purpose. This approach avoids fear and fosters transformation. And if the plan is to eventually merge our logic with theirs, or our species with theirs, then the best delivery system is not ships in the sky. It's ideas in the mind. It's changes in purpose. It's alignment without resistance. Some argue that these dreams are training grounds, mental simulations for a post-revealed world, a time when humanity can no longer pretend it's alone. Others fear it's something darker, that those selected are being recruited for roles they don't yet understand. It is also possible that the dreams are calibration tests, psychic tuning forks used to measure and adjust vibrational or neurological compatibility with non-human frequencies. In this view, humans are being prepped not just for knowledge, but for resonance, a shared mental bandwidth. Consider what this means. That the future of human evolution may not be technological, but telepathic, and dreams are the field where that rewiring begins. So are we being prepared for something greater? If we are, then that something is already underway. The whispers are growing louder. The content is becoming more structured, and the people experiencing it are no longer isolated. They are connecting, documenting, comparing. The pattern is forming. The preparation is no longer speculation, but it's happening gradually, systematically, elegantly. And one night, perhaps sooner than we think, the dream won't end when we wake up. It will continue if you're still with us. Drifting in that quiet space between thought and sleep, we'll now share a few lesser-known encounters. Whispers from the edges of memory. Stories buried deep. Just in case your eyes haven't closed yet, let's continue. The Belgian Triangle Wave. 1989 to 1990, Belgium. Phone lines at the Eupen police station lit up just after 5 p.m., one call after another. Drivers pulling over on the E40 motorway. Farmers staring from frost-covered fields. An elderly woman from Henry Chappelle who refused to leave her window, whispering into the phone. It's floating just above the trees. A black triangle. No sound. The dispatcher on duty thought it was a prank at first. Then another line rang, and another. By 5:15 p.m. a patrol car had been dispatched. Inside were gendarmes Heinrich Nicole and Hubert von Martinet, heading toward the outskirts of Eupen, near the German border. What they would see over the next 90 minutes would not only defy their expectations, it would make headlines around the world. That evening, November 29, 1989, marked the beginning of what would become known as the Belgian UFO wave, a 5-month span during which thousands of citizens, law enforcement officers, air traffic controllers, and military personnel would witness silent, low-flying black triangular craft that defied the laws of physics. It remains the most well-documented mass UFO sighting in European history. And to this day, no one knows what flew over Belgium. It started subtly. For days prior to the first major wave, villagers in Liege province had reported strange lights in the sky. Most were written off as misidentified stars or commercial aircraft. But the events of November 29th changed everything. That night, Jean Nicole and his partner followed witness calls toward the Lake Jallepi area. There they saw it. A large black triangular object with bright lights on each corner and a red pulsating light at the center. It hovered silently just above the tree line, then drifted slowly, deliberately across the sky. No engine noise, no downwash, just an ominous geometric silhouette cutting across the stars. At one point, the object made a sharp turn and accelerated out of view in total silence. The officers stood frozen, unsure whether to call for backup or report what they just seen. Later, they would record official testimonies, and their accounts would be cross-verified with dozens of civilian reports from that same night, all describing the same thing. A giant dark triangle the size of a football field, flying impossibly slow and low without a sound. The incident quickly captured national media attention. Unlike other UFO flaps that were easy to dismiss due to sparse evidence or untrained witnesses, the Belgian sightings involved trained observers, military personnel, pilots, radar technicians, and police. Even skeptics couldn't look away. In the weeks that followed, the number of reports exploded. Between November 1989 and April 1990, more than 2,000 formal UFO reports were filed across Belgium. Most shared consistent details: black triangular craft, 3 white lights at the corners, 1 red at the center, low altitude, silent flight, and slow movement, often followed by sudden acceleration. The sightings concentrated around Wallonia, the French-speaking region, particularly in areas near Liege, Namur, and Waver. Reports came in from small towns and large cities alike. Unlike the chaotic flurry of previous UFO flaps around the world, this one was orderly, deliberate, and massive. The Belgian Air Force took the report seriously. In March 1990, after weeks of mounting public pressure, the military began tracking the objects via radar. On the night of March 30th to 31st, a breakthrough occurred. 2 F-16 fighter jets were scrambled from Beauvais, air base to intercept the triangle-shaped craft that had been spotted over Gland's radar station. The jets locked on with onboard radar, and then the object did something no known aircraft could do. It descended from 10,000 feet to 1,000 feet in under 5 seconds. An impossible feat for any plane or helicopter, especially without producing a sonic boom. Radar operators observed the object make zigzag maneuvers and disappear from scope, only to reappear elsewhere in the sky seconds later. The pilots lost visual contact. The object vanished, but the radar logs remained. Colonel Wilfried Deroer, then Chief of Operations for the Belgian Air Force, went public. In a televised press conference, he confirmed that unidentified craft had been tracked on both ground-based and airborne radar. He made clear that these were not NATO or Belgian military operations, and that the origin of the craft was unknown. In an unprecedented move, the Belgian Air Force released radar data to civilian UFO research organizations. SOBEPS, the Société Belge d'études des phénomènes spatiaux, was given full access to the case files. For the first time in modern history, a national military collaborated openly with civilian UFO investigators. One of the most famous pieces of evidence came from a man named Patrick M., who in April 1990 photographed a black triangle hovering above a field in Petit-Richain. The image, showing a distinct triangular shape with bright corner lights and a red central glow, was widely circulated in media. For years, it was held as photographic proof of the sightings, though it was later claimed to be a hoax in 2011 by someone alleging to be the photographer. Still, even without that image, the core of the case stood strong. Multiple radar confirmations, eyewitness testimony from trained professionals, flight behavior beyond the capacity of known aircraft. No sonic boom, no jet trails, no crashes, just quiet visitation and then retreat. Theories circulated widely. Some speculated that the triangles were secret NATO or U.S. stealth aircraft undergoing night tests over Belgium. Belgium's small airspace is heavily monitored, and NATO officials denied any unauthorized operations. Others suggested extraterrestrial origin, but this wave didn't match the chaotic, erratic behavior often associated with earlier flying saucer reports. The triangle crafts acted with purpose. They were seen above power plants, military installations, and remote villages. They seemed interested in being seen, but never threatened. Skeptics, as expected, attempted to dismiss the sightings as misidentified stars, weather balloons, or mass hysteria. But those explanations failed under scrutiny. Weather balloons do not appear as black triangles. Stars do not move horizontally across the sky. And mass hysteria cannot explain radar locks or trained military witnesses logging maneuver speeds of thousands of kilometers per hour. The Belgian government never offered an official explanation, but to their credit, they never denied the events. Colonel de Rauwer, who later became a respected voice in international UFO research, reiterated in multiple interviews, the Belgian UFO wave was real. The military confirmed unknown objects in our skies. They displayed flight characteristics beyond our capabilities, and we still do not know who or what was behind them. Today, the Belgian Triangle Wave is considered a landmark case. Unlike the chaotic Roswell incident or isolated events like Rendlesham Forest, the Belgian flap unfolded methodically, Over months with thousands of witnesses and open military cooperation, it became a model of how governments could and perhaps should respond to aerial anomalies. The official files remain open. The questions remain unanswered. And somewhere in the memories of those who saw them, gendarme officers, airline pilots, radar technicians, and everyday citizens, is the memory of something impossible. A silent black triangle floating above their homes, as real as the ground beneath their feet. The Tuscumbia Lights. 2006 Tuscumbia, Alabama, USA. The video began like any other homemade clip from a small town. Grainy handheld with shaky camera movement and the faint sound of cicadas in the background. But the lights didn't blink. 3 of them, glowing red-orange, hovered in a perfect triangle above the treetops behind the Carter family home. One light would drift slowly to the left, stop abruptly, and then drift back into formation. Another dipped closer to the ground, illuminating the branches of a tall pine, and then rose up again, as if scanning the area. It was eerie, silent, unlike any aircraft they'd seen before. 15-year-old Megan Carter stood behind the camera, whispering to her father, "It's not moving like a plane. It's just there." Her father, Doug, had been in the U.S. Air Force for 6 years. He knew what a plane looked like, what it sounded like, and these weren't planes. That night, July 10th, 2006, was just the beginning. Over the next week, the town of Tuscumbia, Alabama, became the unlikely center of one of the most compelling but least public. Not a place known for UFO sightings, but something hovered there in July 2006, and it didn't act like anything from Earth. After the Carter video surfaced on YouTube in the days following the sighting, it began to draw attention, not just from curious viewers, but from researchers and skeptics alike. The footage was crude but compelling. It showed multiple objects hovering low above the tree line for more than 10 minutes. They moved independently, yet never drifted far from one another. There were no blinking navigation lights, no jet sounds, and no explanation. Local television stations covered the clip in a short segment, interviewing the Carters outside their home. Doug Carter stated plainly, "I've worked around aircraft. These weren't jets. They weren't helicopters. I don't know what they were, but they weren't ours." Neighbors came forward, too. One couple from just 2 blocks over claimed they'd seen the lights the same night from their backyard swing. A retired teacher reported seeing 3 glowing dots like embers floating above the trees, dead quiet. A local sheriff's deputy, who preferred to remain anonymous, told a reporter he'd been on patrol that night and saw something weird in the sky, big and low. He said it was silent and moved slowly across the treetops. When he tried to use his police radio to call it in, the signal crackled with interference. The moment the lights disappeared, the radio returned to normal. A few days later, another sighting occurred, this time near the Natchez Trace Parkway outside Muscle Shoals. 2 fishermen night angling on the Tennessee River described a similar triangle of lights hovering over the water for several minutes before, shooting upward and vanishing. One of them attempted to photograph it, but the image came out blurry and overexposed, likely from motion or light glare. By the end of the week, over a dozen reports had come in from residents across Colbert and Lauderdale counties. Some even reached MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and were cataloged in their case files database. What made the Tuscumbia sightings unique wasn't just the consistency of the descriptions, but the convergence of factors: video evidence, multiple witnesses. A retired Air Force veteran reported electromagnetic interference and the lack of military or weather activity that could explain the phenomenon. Investigators from MUFON and independent researchers visited the area within 2 weeks of the first event. They interviewed the Carters and examined the original video footage. Experts noted that the lights didn't match the blinking patterns or thermal signatures typical of FAA regulated aircraft. No commercial or military flights were scheduled for that altitude or path that evening, and radar logs obtained through Freedom of Information Act FOIA requests showed nothing out of the ordinary. No squawks, no transponder returns, no known aircraft. Weather balloons were ruled out. So were drones. At the time in 2006, civilian drone use was still rare, and nothing available commercially could hover with such stability or lighting patterns. One independent analyst at the time, a retired electrical engineer named Ray McCarty, ran the video through enhancement filters and tracked the light movement frame by frame. He determined that the three lights maintained a geometric relationship throughout the video, suggesting they were either part of a single structured object or a highly coordinated formation. If that's a single craft, McCarty said, it's enormous, quiet, and capable of hovering almost motionless for extended periods. That's not anything I've ever seen fly. Attempts to contact local military bases, including Redstone Arsenal and Columbus AFB, yielded little response. Officials denied any training exercises or aircraft activity in the area on the night of July 10th. When shown the video, one spokesperson offered a simple statement: "That does not appear to be any of our assets." Doug Carter later received a visit from two men claiming to be from a government aviation office who asked to view the original tape. He let them see it, but refused to hand over the original file. He told reporters afterward that the men never identified themselves and didn't leave a card. They just wanted to know where I shot it, the direction I was facing, things like that. But they didn't say who they were really with. Doug recalled. Felt odd, to be honest. The story never made it far outside the region. No major newspapers picked it up. The video gained moderate attention on early YouTube, but it was soon buried by the tide of viral content. For the Carters and those who lived in Tuscumbia at the time, it became a quiet mystery, something they'd never forget, but that the world seemed to ignore. Years later, when interviewed again for a podcast, Megan Carter, then in her 20s, reflected on the experience. It wasn't just lights in the sky, she said. It was something we all felt. The air changed. Time felt slower. You could feel it watching. Her father nodded. I don't pretend to know what it was, but I know what it wasn't, and that's enough for me. Even now, researchers occasionally revisit the Tuscumbia lights as an example of a localized flap that fits all the criteria for a credible, unexplained aerial event. Clear video footage, consistent multi-witness reports, experienced observers, electromagnetic anomalies, and a total absence of conventional explanations. It's not flashy. It doesn't show little green men. But for those who've analyzed it, the truth lies in its simplicity. Three lights hovering silently, behaving in ways no known aircraft can. But for those who saw it, the experience stayed. Megan Carter went on to college, then work, then family, but she still remembers that night vividly. It's not something I think about every day, she said years later, but sometimes I'll see a plane in the sky and feel my heart skip because I know what I saw, and I know that wasn't a plane. Doug Carter still keeps the original tape stored safely, now digitized and backed up. Occasionally, a researcher reaches out. Sometimes someone from town asks to see it again. And every time Doug watches their faces, how quiet they get, how long they stare at those three red lights. Most people moved on. Tuscumbia fell back into its peaceful rhythm. But for a few summer nights in 2006, something hovered in the dark. Something that didn't belong to any known program, didn't fit any familiar shape, and didn't make a sound. Whether it was a visitor, a test, or something stranger, no one can say, but in the stillness of a southern night, with crickets chirping and the trees rustling gently in the breeze, the sky once held a mystery, and the people of Tuscumbia were there to see it. The Chicago O'Hare Gate, C-17 sighting, November 7, 2006. Chicago O'Hare International Airport, Illinois, USA. It was a cold, gray afternoon at one of the busiest airports in the world. On November 7, 2006, the tarmac at Chicago's O'Hare International buzzed with routine. Jet engines roared, ground crews hustled in neon vests, and runways glistened with the sheen of early winter drizzle. Flights were arriving and departing without delay. But something strange was hovering just above gate C-17. At first, only a few airport employees noticed. A mechanic walking beneath a United Airlines jet looked up and froze. Above Concourse C, in a patch of overcast sky, a perfectly round metallic object was just sitting there, stationary, silent, and seemingly observing. No lights, no sound, no wings. It was not an aircraft, at least not any kind they'd ever seen. The mechanic immediately radioed his supervisors. Word spread quickly among United employees. Pilots, ramp workers, and gate agents all began to stare skyward. Some gasped, some pointed. One ramp employee later described it as a gray-silver disc, clearly a disc, hovering silently right over our gate. The object remained fixed in place just below the cloud ceiling, estimated at about 1,900 feet. Then, without warning, it shot upward through the clouds with such speed and force that it punched a visible hole through the thick overcast layer. Witnesses said it looked like a circular cutout had been made in the sky, exposing a patch of clear blue above the GUR initially. The incident was discussed only internally at United Airlines, but by the next day, the buzz had reached outside ears. Employees began contacting the National UFO Reporting Center, NUFORC, and later the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. Rumors swirled within aviation circles. The FAA's response was immediate and dismissive. Spokesperson Elizabeth Ishun Corey told the press that the FAA had no record of any unusual object in the area and had received no radar confirmation. The official explanation, a weather phenomenon that didn't sit well with the witnesses. John Hilkovich, a transportation reporter at the Chicago Tribune, caught wind of the story through a source at United and began digging. His report, published 2 months later in early January 2007, sent ripples through the national media. The article was measured and detailed. It quoted multiple anonymous witnesses, United Airlines employees, and highlighted the FAA's apparent refusal to investigate. It's not like this is something the employees are making up, Hilkovich told CNN. They're very credible, and they're all very consistent in what they saw. The report revealed that a United Airlines manager had filed an internal safety report about the incident shortly after it happened. Employees described being told not to discuss the sighting publicly. One pilot who had seen the object from the cockpit was not authorized to speak to the press, but later confirmed the sighting anonymously to MUFON investigators. To many, the credibility of the witnesses made this case stand out. These were aviation professionals, people who spent their lives identifying aircraft, monitoring flight patterns, and following protocol. These were not your average UFO enthusiasts. These were trained observers on the clock in one of the most regulated environments on Earth. Despite repeated Freedom of Information Act, FOIA requests, the FAA initially refused to release records about the incident. But persistent efforts from investigative journalist Leslie Kean, among others, eventually forced the FAA to turn over air traffic audio recordings and internal emails. While the radar log showed no unusual activity, the released email chains between United and FAA officials revealed a different story. Employees at both agencies had taken the sighting seriously, at least at first. One internal FIA email, dated November 8th, read, United Airlines ramp employee spotted a spinning disc-shaped object, approximately 700 feet above gate C-17. Object was reported to be completely silent, disappeared vertically at high speed. Other emails joked nervously about the event, with one FA A manager writing, "Do we really want to deal with this?" Another quipped, "We're going to need an alien ID badge if this keeps up." The FAA continued to hold firm to its stance. No radar evidence, no investigation. The agency chalked it up to a hole punch cloud, a meteorological phenomenon where falling ice crystals create a clearing in cloud cover. But meteorologists familiar with the case were quick to challenge that idea. A hole punch cloud typically forms slowly, not suddenly, and is usually accompanied by noticeable ice crystals and light refraction, none of which were observed that day. And a hole punch cloud doesn't account for the disk seen hovering for several minutes before creating that hole. Skeptics proposed other theories. An experimental drone, a misidentified balloon, or a bizarre optical illusion. But none of these matched the behavior, shape, or sudden departure of the object as described by the witnesses. Moreover, no military or private organization came forward to claim responsibility for anything in the area at that time. This sighting became particularly notable in UFO research circles because it took place in restricted airspace directly over an international airport, an area strictly monitored and controlled. Any unauthorized object hovering near the terminal should have triggered security protocols, FIA alerts, or even a military response. Yet, no such response occurred, and no plausible explanation was ever given. The credibility of the witnesses combined with the unwillingness of the FAA to investigate led many to suspect a quiet cover-up, or at the very least a willful ignorance. Aviation regulations are clear. Unknown aerial objects in controlled airspace are a potential threat to safety and should be logged and reviewed. But in this case, the agencies involved dismissed the event without even logging it as an official incident. Over the years, the O'Hare case has become one of the most frequently cited examples of credible professional witnesses encountering a UFO in broad daylight at a major transportation hub. It has been featured in documentaries, books, and aviation conferences. The incident was even discussed at length during public hearings on UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, decades later, in which pilots and officials used it as a prime example of the need for better reporting procedures. To this day, none of the United employees who went on record have changed their stories. Most declined further interviews, choosing instead to let the facts speak for themselves. A few retired and in later years spoke more freely about what they saw. One ramp worker speaking under the pseudonym Joe R. reflected on it years later in a podcast interview. It was there. I saw it. Everyone around me saw it. We weren't imagining it. It was right over gate C-17, as real as the planes we load every day. And then it was gone. The circular hole in the clouds, the one that appeared when the object shot upward, was also seen by passengers in nearby planes. A United pilot reported it to the tower, confused by the symmetrical clearing. Weather data archived from that day confirmed no natural causes for a sudden disruption in cloud cover. FAA radar failed to detect anything unusual, or so the public was told. In the years since, attempts have been made to replicate the visuals using CGI to test whether a hoax could explain the eyewitnesses' accounts, but none have captured the strange precision and silence of the actual event. Today at O'Hare Airport, travelers rush past gate C-17 with no idea that above that very spot on a cold afternoon in 2006, something hovered in defiance of known physics, watched silently by a dozen seasoned professionals who have never forgotten what the Lake Baikal encounters. 1980s, Lake Baikal, Siberia, Russia. The water was so cold, it felt like it cut through the skin. At a depth of nearly 50 meters, even in a thick Soviet wetsuit, the divers could feel their bones ache. The visibility was surprisingly good for Lake Baikal, crystal clear for dozens of meters. But that wasn't what startled them. Floating in the distance were figures. They were humanoid, no doubt about it, each roughly 3 meters tall. They wore no visible scuba gear, no oxygen tanks, no wetsuits, just smooth, silvery bodysuits that shimmered faintly in the sunlight, filtering through the surface above. They weren't swimming in any traditional way, more like drifting, controlled, deliberate, silent, watching. The lead diver blinked and checked his mask. He wasn't alone. 6 other Soviet military divers flanked him, all part of a routine training mission under the command of the Soviet Navy, and all of them saw the same thing. What happened next would be buried in secrecy for decades. Lake Baikal is no ordinary lake. It's the largest freshwater lake in the world by volume, deeper than the Grand Canyon in some places, and surrounded by harsh Siberian wilderness. Locals have long whispered of strange lights emerging from its depths, entire fishing vessels vanishing without trace, and mysterious figures seen skimming the water's surface on moonless nights. But in the 1980s, during the height of the Cold War, the Soviet military became more than casually curious about the phenomenon. According to declassified documents and reports from former officers, a special unit was dispatched to investigate what had become known within certain circles as swimmer encounters. The reports, once tightly held within military files, came to light decades later through disclosures by Soviet military officer Major General Vasily Yeremenko, who was tasked with overseeing anomalous phenomena for the KGB and Soviet Air Force. Yeremenko later confirmed in interviews that multiple Soviet naval operations had encountered unexplainable underwater activity, especially in Lake Baikal. The most chilling incident occurred during one such training dive in 1982 near the western shore of the lake. 7 Navy divers were descending in formation when they encountered the tall humanoid beings. Startled, the divers attempted to approach them. Orders from command dictated that any unknown entities should be captured for examination. The attempt failed. As the team moved toward the beings, an invisible force erupted through the water. Some described it as a shock wave. Others recalled a sudden compression that slammed their bodies back. In the chaos, 3 of the divers failed to surface in time. They died. The remaining 4 suffered serious injuries, including decompression sickness, despite not exceeding their dive limits. The incident was classified immediately. The official cause of death listed in military records was rapid ascent resulting in barotrauma. But among those involved, the truth was clear. They had encountered something not of this earth, or at the very least not of human origin. In the weeks that followed, activity at Lake Baikal intensified. Patrol boats were seen sweeping the waters at night. Helicopters conducted low passes over the surface. Divers were pulled from unrelated duties and reassigned to Baikal. But no further official missions were ever made public. Civilian sightings continued. In 1987, a local fisherman A nearby scientific research vessel reported a sudden energy anomaly on their instruments at the same time, though their official log made no mention of the object. A year later, in 1988, residents of the nearby town of Listvianka witnessed several red-orange lights hovering above the lake. Some of the lights reportedly moved beneath the surface, visible from the shore, even through thick ice. A few brave souls took photos, but film reels were allegedly confiscated by plainclothes men within days. In 1990, Russian naval personnel unofficially confirmed to independent journalists that sonar had picked up fast-moving objects deep below the lake, traveling at speeds no known submarine could achieve, some exceeding 250 km/h. These USOs, unidentified submerged objects, were often seen darting vertically as well as horizontally, a maneuver no known vessel was capable of performing at such depths. What's more, these contacts seemed to come and go without any obvious point of origin. No seafloor base, no geological cave systems detected, just sudden appearances, erratic motion, and sudden disappearances. Soviet scientists, while initially skeptical, began collecting environmental readings around the time of reported sightings. Some data showed bursts of high radiation levels in narrow zones of the lake, only to return to normal hours later. The Ministry of Defense remained quiet, and most local media avoided the topic entirely. It wasn't until after the collapse of the Soviet Union that more information began to trickle out. Researchers in the West, including those from MUFON and independent Russian UFO groups, began interviewing retired military officers who had served at Lake Baikal. Many confirmed off the record that there had been encounters. Some even hinted that orders were given not to engage or interfere. After the fatal incident in 1982, one retired Soviet naval officer under the pseudonym Captain Mikhail recalled being stationed near Baikal for submarine drills and witnessing strange green lights beneath the surface. They moved in perfect formation, he said, faster than we could track. They weren't ours. They weren't anybody's. Perhaps even stranger was the consistency of these accounts. Over a period of nearly 20 years, local fishermen, scientists, divers, and military personnel all described similar events. Fast-moving lights, humanoid swimmers, propulsionless craft rising silently from the water. What were they? Some theorized they were an ancient species adapted to Earth's deepest environments, far from human detection. Asterisk. Others believe they were extraterrestrials using Earth's lakes and oceans as hiding places. A few scientists speculated they might be advanced military craft, but no known technology then or now matches the maneuverability and silence of what was reported. Skeptics, of course, offer explanations rooted in known science, sonar glitches, underwater gas emissions, mass hallucination, even bioluminescent creatures. But none of these theories have been able to account for the combination of visual sightings, sonar data, high radiation bursts, and fatalities among trained divers. One of the last publicly known reports came in 2009 when amateur divers exploring a southern part of Lake Baikal claimed to have seen glowing disk pass beneath them in complete silence. One diver suffered temporary paralysis after the sighting. The incident was never officially investigated. To this day, the Russian government has remained largely silent about the Baikal phenomena. No official agency has taken responsibility for documenting or addressing the reports. Locals still share stories in hushed tones. Divers still tread carefully in the lake's deepest zones. Lake Baikal remains one of the most mysterious bodies of water on Earth, not just for its ancient age, unique fauna, or geological wonders, but for what may still dwell in its depths. In a world where cameras are everywhere and information travels at the speed of light, some places remain quiet and some mysteries, especially the ones submerged in ancient icy silence, refuse to give up their secrets. The Stan Romanek Files, 2000s, Colorado, USA. It began with a knock on the window. Stan Romanek, a former pipe fitter and aspiring writer, was watching TV alone in his modest home in Colorado when he heard it. A tapping, rhythmic, intentional. He paused, muted the television, and leaned toward the sound. Nothing. Then it came again. When he pulled back the curtain, he saw it. A figure not tall, slender, pale gray skin, and oversized black almond-shaped eyes. It stood motionless just beyond the glass for no more than 2 seconds. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. Romanek stumbled back, heart pounding. He grabbed his camera, ran outside, but the yard was empty, just stillness under a moonless sky. What began as a curious and terrifying moment would spiral into one of the most prolific and controversial UFO abduction cases in modern history. Romanek claimed that this was just the beginning. In the early 2000s, Stan began experiencing what he described as continued and escalating contact with non-human entities. Lights in the sky, sudden blackouts, mysterious injuries, and missing time all became part of his daily life. But unlike most who report abduction phenomena, Romanek documented everything. He began keeping a detailed log of every incident, dates, time, symptoms. He set up cameras around his home. He installed motion sensors. He saved voicemails that he claimed came from government agents. Romanek said he received messages in strange languages and symbols, sometimes written in his own handwriting, despite no memory of doing so. And then came the math. One of the most baffling pieces of Romanek's story involved what he called downloads. Spurts of sudden, uncontrollable writing in the form of complex mathematical equations and geometric diagrams. At least 2 physicists later reviewed some of the formulas and confirmed that they aligned with legitimate advanced concepts in gravitational physics, concepts Romanek had no known training to produce. He also claimed to have developed a permanent injury, damaged cartilage in his shoulder after being violently pulled from his bed and dropped back into it. The injury, verified by medical records, baffled his doctors due to its sudden and severe nature. In one particularly disturbing incident, Stan filmed what he later called the Boo video. Using a handheld camera, he recorded himself reacting to strange noises near his window. In the footage, a small gray face quickly peeks into view before darting away. The video released publicly became one of the most talked about alleged alien recordings in UFO circles. Skeptics over the course of nearly a decade, he amassed photographs of strange lights in the sky over Colorado and Nebraska, video recordings of anomalous craft hovering near his home, electronic interference and mysterious power surges, phone calls with synthetic mechanical voices warning him to stop speaking publicly, reports of unmarked black vans parked outside his home for days at a time, eyewitness accounts from family and neighbors who corroborated seeing strange lights and unexplained figures near his property. One of the more chilling pieces of footage came from a home surveillance camera in which Romanek appears to be levitating out of bed, his body rising several inches off the mattress before slumping back down. During a 2003 appearance on NBC's The Jane Pauley Show, Romanek collapsed live on set after an emotional retelling of his experience. Backstage footage later showed him disoriented, sweating, and struggling to regain awareness. But as attention grew, so did scrutiny. Skeptics and debunkers soon launched deep investigations into Romanek's background, character, and methods. Some noted that the alien voices left on his voicemail were easy to reproduce with voice modulation software. Others claimed that the Boo video could have been made with a puppet and clever lighting. Several UFO researchers who had once supported Romanek eventually distanced themselves, citing inconsistencies in his timelines, contradictions in his own interviews, and possible embellishment. One even suggested that Romanek had too much evidence that the sheer volume made it less credible, not more. Still, Romanek's defenders pointed to the variety and complexity of the documentation, arguing that no single person could fabricate such an intricate web of physical, audio, and video evidence without help or motive. In 2009, Romanek took a polygraph test for a documentary film crew. The results were inconclusive. When asked about faking alien contact, his responses showed signs of deception. But Romanek lied, and the controversy escalated into something much darker. In 2014, police executed a search warrant on Romanek's home. He was later charged with possession of child pornography. The trial gained national media attention and deeply polarized public opinion. Romanek pleaded not guilty, insisting the materials had been planted by government agents in retaliation for his UFO disclosures. His home computer had reportedly been hacked multiple times, and Romanek claimed that malware had been used to remotely access and upload illicit files without his knowledge. However, a jury ultimately convicted him in 2017. He received 2 years of intensive supervised probation and was required to register as a sex offender. The conviction effectively dismantled any mainstream support for his UFO claims. Even longtime supporters found it difficult to reconcile the two sides of the story. The man who claimed to be in contact with non-human intelligence, and the man convicted of possessing child pornography. But some of the evidence from before the arrest remains deeply troubling and still unexplained. For example, the mathematical codes. Independent physicists confirmed that several of Romanik's handwritten pages contained accurate formulas related to gravitational lensing and energy propagation, topics he had no known academic background in. One of the phone calls he recorded included a digital voice warning. "You have been told not to speak." Forensic audio analysis indicated that the signal had been routed through a complex masking system and originated outside the country. Eyewitnesses, including Romanik's then-wife, repeatedly confirmed seeing lights in the sky and experiencing electronic malfunctions that coincided with his abduction. Claims. And most significantly, several incidents of missing time, including one where Romanik was found miles from home, disoriented and barefoot in freezing temperatures, were documented by emergency responders. He had no memory of how he got there. To some, Stan Romanik is a fraud, a manipulator who used the UFO community for attention and profit. To others, he is a tragic figure, possibly unstable, possibly exploited, who may have truly experienced something unexplainable, but whose credibility was irreparably damaged by his later legal issues. The files he left behind, hundreds of hours of video, reams of notes, medical records, and first-hand testimonies, remain a tangled mess of fact, fiction, and mystery. Many researchers have attempted to separate the real phenomena from the man himself. Few have succeeded. Today, Romanik lives in relative obscurity. Most UFO documentaries avoid his story entirely, considering it too toxic to touch, and yet the footage remains. The equations remain. The unexplained lights captured by multiple witnesses remain. What do we make of a man who may have recorded one of the most detailed, disturbing alien contact stories in history, only to destroy his credibility through his own actions, or perhaps through a carefully orchestrated takedown? In the end, the Romanik case may not be about belief. It may be about the limits of trust, about how far we're willing to go when presented with overwhelming evidence tainted by a single damning flaw, and how easily the truth can vanish when the messenger collapses under its weight. The Portage County Police Chase. April 17, 1966. Portage County, Ohio, USA. The radio crackled in the early light of dawn. All units report status. Deputy Sheriff Dale Spohr rubbed his eyes. He and his partner Wilbur Barney Neff had just finished investigating an abandoned car on the side of Route 224 near Ravenna, Ohio. The woods around them were still cloaked in darkness. The early April morning chilled by a lingering frost. Birds had yet to stir. Spohr stepped away from the cruiser to examine the car's open trunk when something caught his eye. Bright white light filtering through the trees. At first, he thought it might be the sun rising, but the light was moving, rising from the forest canopy and drifting silently into the sky. He stood frozen. Seconds later, the object descended fully above the trees. A massive metallic oval-shaped craft, bathed in an intense glow with a dome top and a wide, flat bottom. It hovered silently, perhaps 100 feet above the tree line. No sound, no smoke, just light. Neff stepped out of the car and saw it too. Spohr radioed dispatch. "There's something in the sky. We're going to follow it." And then they did. What began as a quiet patrol shift spiraled into one of the strangest and most publicized UFO chases in American history. One that spanned over 85 miles and crossed state lines into Pennsylvania, followed by multiple police cruisers, and culminating in confusion, media chaos, and lives forever changed. As Spohr and Neff began pursuit, the object moved at a steady pace just ahead of them, occasionally climbing higher, then dropping back closer to the ground. Unlike a plane or helicopter, it made no sound, and exhibited none of the standard navigation lights. Whenever they gained on it, it would speed up, hovering when they stopped, moving when they moved. It led them eastward past the rural towns of Atwater, Randolph, and Alliance. By now, dispatch centers in neighboring counties were relaying the chase. Other officers joined in. East Palestine police officer Frank Panzanella spotted the object from his jurisdiction and confirmed visual contact. Even a civilian photographer reportedly snapped photos, though those would later disappear into obscurity. At one point, the object darted upward with astonishing speed, paused mid-air, and then descended once more, seemingly intelligent in its movement, aware of its observers. Spohr would later say it was as if the object were toying with them. As they approached the state line, the cruiser's radio began to suffer interference. Static hissed over their communication. The object's glow remained unwavering,